So we're halfway through the 2021 home and away AFL season. We thought we'd take a look back at our man Kieran Francis's 7 outrageous pre-season predictions. How do you reckon you've gone? What's the general vibe going into this, Bruno?
I actually think I've gone pretty well. I made a couple of big calls that have come off. There was a couple of failures too, but I think in general, I've done reasonably well.
So the first one, forget Richmond three-peat. Chokers Geelong will finally lift the cup again. The first part of that, forget Richmond three-peat. Are you writing the Tigers off?
I wouldn't 100% write them off. We've seen in all of their premiership years that they've actually come home, with a wet sail in terms of this, this time of the season. They've usually been around, 4th or 5th on the ladder and sort of come home strong. And I think at this time, they're in a similar position. So I wouldn't write them off completely, but they are definitely struggling. They've had some bad injuries, Tom Lynch being out at the moment and Cochin's been out for periods and Prestia and Lambert and McIntosh, it all goes on. So I think it's going to be tough for them, but I wouldn't 100% write them off, no.
And what about, Chokers Geelong will finally lift the cup again. They had a great win last night away to Port Adelaide. You still sticking by that one?
I think that Geelong should definitely be right up there with Melbourne. They're an experienced team. They've obviously failed in previous years in terms of, winning the big one. But I think that Chris Scott is trying to get them to peak at the right time of year, because in previous years they've obviously done really well in the home and away season, and they've not got the job done in the finals. Adding in Jeremy Cameron, Isaac Smith, and Sean Higgins has been massive to that team, and they've also had players like Mark O'Connor and Jed Buse and Henry that have also sort of lifted to another level too. So I think that the Cats are going to be look right up there when the business end of the season.
Yeah, they're pretty well primed. And moving on to the second one, this one you've absolutely picked the eyes out of. Nathan Buckley won't see out the year and Collingwood will miss the 8. Do you think it was the right call to go their separate ways? They obviously, Buckley stepped down earlier this week.
You know what? I actually thought, if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I actually thought that they were going to back Buckley in for a rebuild. It just didn't seem as if the general vibe coming out of the club was that the union was going to end, and it didn't seem like there was any real options, for Buckley to be replaced. So it seemed like maybe it was the best idea to obviously install him, keep him there for a couple of years while the rebuild and see how he goes. But obviously, Buckley's decided that he wants to leave, and the club, with a mutual agreement. The start of the season, it just looked as if, with losing Treloar, Phillips, and Stevenson, the list profile, I think they're making the finals last year. They were pretty lucky. They had some injuries and everything, but their forward line's really dysfunctional. They don't know where to play Jordan. They don't know where to play Jordan McGoey. Their main forward targets in Cox and Darcy Cameron aren't really getting that many goals. Mychek's a bit of a floater who, is a bit inconsistent. So it just didn't seem to me that they were going to have a successful season, and that kind of spelt trouble for Buckley. And it's kind of the way it's worked out, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Now on to the next one. Not quite on the money with this one. Unfashionable Fremantle could be the top 8 bolter in 2021. Now, there are obviously 2 wins out the 8, but there is that gap between 8th and the rest. At the moment, it looks like Sydney's that team who most didn't have making the finals that will probably get there. How do you feel about this prediction, 13 rounds in?
I think I've been done in by the injuries that Fremantle have. I mean, if you notice, I actually mentioned that a slew of injuries heading into round 1 with Michael Walters, Lobb and Darcy hasn't helped the team. And, that's kind of been the story for Fremantle. Chera's missed a significant amount of time. Brayshaw's been out. And the defence has been absolutely gutted. Joel Hamling, Griffin Logue and Alex Pearce have barely played this season. So I think that if Freo had a full list to choose from, or even a partially full list, then they would probably have a couple of extra wins and be closer to the 8. I think that Justin Longmuir is a great coach. They say that he had a massive part to do with what happened at Collingwood in 2018. And, Freo played some really good football. They took Port Adelaide close. Adelaide Oval a couple of weeks ago, despite their injury list. And I think that Freo are in pretty good hands with Justin Longmuir, and yeah, they've got a good list. They've got a really good young talent coming through, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with over the next couple of seasons.
That's the thing with those young sides. Sometimes, they haven't quite got the consistency, but when they do put it together, they can, like you say, challenge any team really.
Sydney Swans is a brilliant example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And on to your next one. St Kilda are priming themselves for a premiership challenge, but not in 2021. This one, you've pretty much hit the nail on the head, really.
I have, but I still thought the Saints were going to have a better year. I still thought St Kilda was going to finish around about the same spot on the ladder, possibly a little bit lower. But if you had told me that St Kilda was going to miss the finals, I would have said that was unlikely at the start of the year. Injuries haven't helped. There's another team, same as Fremantle, that started the season with several injuries. Marshall and Geary and Ben Patton are players that were missing before the season started. And Max King also actually missed a game early too. But it's basically, the problem with St Kilda has been, it looks like they've got a lot of mental issues. There's been performances that have been all over the shop. There's been the massive losses against Essendon, the Bulldogs, Richmond and Port, where the team has looked second rate, to be honest, and that they should be a bottom four side. And then there's been other performances where the team has been quite good. The West Coast game, even Sydney last week, they played a St Kilda side, I thought played pretty well. And also the vibe coming out of the club with the Max King goal thing, and there seems to be different messages coming from Simon Lethlane, the chief executive, and also Brett Ratton when it comes around to what the players can do. And the club's also been saying to the media that they shouldn't post headlines about certain things, the Missy Higgins thing, for example. It just all seems it just smells a bit funny, what's going on behind the scenes. Seems like it's a bit off, and last season that wasn't the case. Everything was working perfectly oiled, there wasn't many injuries, and the club, which traditionally hasn't been run very well over the years, looked like last season was being run perfectly, and this year's kind of a bit of a different set of circumstances. So it's going to be interesting for St Kilda because they remind me a lot of Melbourne, when Melbourne made the preliminary final a couple of years ago, and then Melbourne dropped off the face of the earth the next season, and finished right down the bottom of the ladder. So the challenge for St Kilda is to try to pick themselves up, get their list together, and try to do what Melbourne did and improve the next season. But yeah, it's a tough sell.
So this list and Ratton, in your eyes, aren't a bust. They're still, in the mix potentially over the coming years.
I wouldn't say it's 100% a bust, but in terms of it being a list that was going to sort of be a final challenger over 4 or 5 years, which it kind of looked like how young it was, and the style of football that was being played last year, there's definitely going to be question marks over that because, injuries haven't helped. Last season everyone was saying how amazing all the recruits were and everything, and now it's almost a completely different tune. Brad Hill struggled more. Hanbury hasn't got on the park. Zach Jones has been injured. Dougal Howard's been okay, but Dan Butler has been the opposite of the All-Australian form that he was close to last year. So it seems to me that things have fallen, the wheels have fallen off, and it's going to be a challenge for the club to get them back on. Yeah,
absolutely. And now your next one, this was a bit of a joke one. Matt Rowell is not going to win the AFL Rising Star Award, which he said was a joke at the time, but I don't know what's in your crystal ball because the bloke hasn't played since round one and he got injured pretty early back then. He's coming back this week, so the timing's quite good. Do you think he's still a chance?
I've heard a rumour that a few people in the office might want him to come back for their betting
this season. Might have got a good price.
Well, it's funny, the reason why I thought that Matt Rowell was such a certain winner was because I don't know, it didn't feel as if there was a strong, I know it's hard to tell because you haven't seen the new draftees play and everything, but I don't know, it didn't feel as if there was a massively strong field of second year players who are still eligible. I think I mentioned Tom Green as a contender who he is and everything, and Matty Rowell's definitely a chance. I think that Nick Cox has probably who's the favourite right now, has probably got it locked on. But Lachie Scholl got dropped this week for Adelaide, which will probably be a massive dent in his hopes of having a crack at it. and other players that are contenders, just like James Jordan, they're decent players, but they're not really taking the, I don't know, they're not the level of, say, Caleb Serong last season. So yeah, if Matty Rowell comes out and has a really good 8 to 9 weeks for the rest of the season, then he can still win it.
Yeah, I think your point from pre-season still stands. No one's making a super strong case for it. I think with just under half the season to go, it's still sort of anyone's award, really.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, I mean, obviously the Swans have had a couple of good rookies as well, but those players, well, particularly Warner's still contributing and everything, but it's hard for rookies to maintain form throughout the whole season, and we saw Serong do it pretty well last season. Nick Cox is even he actually got dropped, but was given a reprieve against St Kilda, and actually was a late in. So I mean, even Nick Cox, who's a favourite, hasn't had a fully consistent season. So I guess that just even panders more to Rowell winning it. So I guess if you're a punter, Matty Rowell at 650 might be some decent odds.
On to your next one. Carlton will improve in 2021, but not by enough. Have Carlton improved in 2021?
No, they haven't. This one's probably not correct, although I did pick that they weren't going to rise like a lot of people did. I don't know. I have a strong opinion that Carlton appointed David Teague too quickly back in the day. If they had waited till the end of the season, they didn't need to appoint him straight away. They could have waited until the end of the season and then made a decision at the end of the season. Teague obviously wasn't in demand to be a senior coach elsewhere, and I don't think they needed to just simply appoint him straight away because they had a successful period. Ross Lyon was actually drilled at the end of the season with Fremantle as well. So, I mean, Ross Lyon could be coach of Carlton right now if they had waited, and it just didn't make much sense. North Melbourne did a similar thing with Reece Shaw. They kind of appointed him. So, yeah, with Carlton, they've got clear issues. I mean, they've got roughly about $2.6 million of their salary cap tied up in halfback flanks at the moment with Sard, Williams, and Doherty. That's a lot of money to be in that area. Like those players are great, but putting that money into Zach Williams and hoping that he was going to be a midfielder was a huge risk. Great player, but as we've seen this season, they tried to play him in midfield, and he has played okay there for GWS before, but he bombed majorly, and they've actually had to move him back to halfback flank, and Doherty's actually gone to the wing and is playing good footy there, and that's a position Doherty hasn't played since younger days. So they've found a better mix, but that's a lot of money to be tied up in that area of the field, and I don't think their midfield has improved because of Sam Walsh, but it hasn't improved enough to be able to, for them to be able to push up into the eight. And when you think about it, they've got arguably the best key forward in the comp as well, and they're not even close to the eight. So there's a few worries down there. And to be fair, Jacob Wiedering is probably the best centre half back in the comp too. So when you've got like two of the best bookends in the comp, and you're not even you're going worse than you are last year, you've got to be asking questions about the midfield, the coaching, and I think that David Teague is probably, I wouldn't say that he's definitely going to be sacked, but things aren't looking too good.
Yeah, especially when he played pretty good against West Coast last week, but Brady Cripps has been playing hurt all year. Sort of, they're talking about potentially Walsh assuming that captaincy role. Like, Paddy Cripps is only, 25? He's sort of carried them for the last few years, and it seems to have kind of taken its toll at the moment.
It's a great point you bring up, because we can liken Carlton to St Kilda in terms of the mixed messaging coming out of the clubs with Cripps, in terms of like, is he injured, is he not injured, is he fit, is he not fit? And there's also been that issue that Carlton had when they actually approached Justin Lepich for two different roles at the club. From I think it was the president, and then another member of the board approached Lepich for two separate roles. So it seems like, in a much similar vein, that Carlton, things aren't functioning brilliantly off the field. So I think that that's obviously having an impact with the team on the field, and it must be pretty frustrating for Carlton supporters, because they've been waiting for the team to come for a long time, as we know, and they just seem to stay at the same level and take a step back, one step forward, one step back, just repeatedly.
Absolutely. And now your last one. Footy is going to be more exciting this season, but there will be more injuries. Now, after probably a month or 6 weeks, you would say 100% you've nailed it. Now we're halfway through. Do you think footy's more exciting, first of all?
It's a good question. The coaches have wrestled back control, haven't they, of with the defensive styles of football? Like, for example, a lot of teams, and in particular, I noticed Sydney do it last week. They actually set up a zone pretty much on the halfback line on the wing now. So like, gone is the press where teams would try to press up all the way. So when a team's got a kick in, the opposition would like press right up and try and keep them hemmed in. But now with the rules and stuff and everything, teams are setting their zone a little bit further back, which is kind of stopping that quick play and that quick transition that we were getting. Because obviously, if you spot up a kick, coming out from a kick in 50 meters, about 50 meters out from your own goal, then one handball pass, and then you're kicking over the previous zone with a player like Jake Lloyd or a Brad Hill, for example. Those type of players would run past, run the 10-15 minutes and kick you over the top, and that's why we're seeing so much scoring and everything. And the coaches have kind of figured that out, and they're also using the wingman, defensive wingman, which Geelong used well last year in terms of getting back. And teams like Melbourne, with Max Gawn, for example, just relentlessly running back. Richmond and Nankervis as well, and getting in the hole. So clubs with really fit AFL ruckman, for example, are doing a lot better than clubs that aren't, for example, that are good inside markers. So we're obviously seeing a lot of injuries. It's hard to tell though whether it's the quicker game, different game style. Is it the change from the shorter quarters to longer quarters? Is it the rotations? It's really hard to tell and everything. But I guess one of the questions is with the medical sub, how do you think that's gone so far?
It's hard to say. Like I think it's brought in with the right intention, but I think the AFL kind of lost their nerve a touch in terms of the enforcing the mandatory break. There's so much grey that obviously they're gonna back the club doctors in and the club medicos in. I think it's fine. I think it's okay, as we saw it seen in a few games, you can almost get an advantage if a bloke pings a hammy, then you get fresh legs on at a crucial time. So these unintended consequences happen when you sort of rush things in like this. But overall, I haven't got too many qualms with it. What about you?
Well, I guess one of the surprising things for me is that I thought there'd be more instances of AFL teams trying to take clear advantage of it. Most of the time when a player's subbed out, they've missed weeks. There hasn't been many times when a player's been subbed out and they've played the next week and there's been questions asked about the integrity of the rule. I think clubs have actually followed the rule with way more integrity than I thought. One of the only possibly strange ones that I can think of was obviously Prestia last week. Prestia came off late with a hamstring problem, and then Rioli came on. Presti's had a lot of hamstring issues over the years. So for him to have a hamstring problem and then to be playing this week is interesting. Now, he might have felt some tightness there and the Tigers didn't want to risk him, which is fair enough. But so I'm not suggesting that the Tigers have manipulated the rule stuff, but it's just basically there hasn't been many of those scenarios where it could be questioned, which I guess the AFL will be happy about. But yeah, it is interesting. The rule was brought in 48 hours before the season starts, which is unusual for the AFL. The AFL usually pretty calculated and well thought out with their organisation and everything. So, I think it definitely helps, because I guess if players are going to be ruled out with concussion more readily because we're kind of being more careful with concussion because we should be, then I guess you need to have a sub and whatnot. But maybe they need to make it only for concussion, because concussion is pretty black and white, and also it's pretty black and white that with concussed you are missing the next week. So maybe, I don't know. I'm not really sure, but it'll be interesting to see how it develops. But I've just been surprised about the integrity of each team. You've done all the questions asking and stuff. I want to ask you a question. Who do you think will win the flag this season, and which team has been the biggest surprise to you this year?
So pre-season I had Port Adelaide. I'm not going to completely write them off, but I'm definitely a lot less confident. I think if you put a gun to my head, I'd say Melbourne. I think they've figured out how they want to play. All their big guns are firing. Few injuries. They're kicking goals, which was my main concern. So yeah, I'll go with Melbourne for the flag. And my biggest surprise, I'd have to say Sydney, and obviously I ride this one pretty hard being a Swans fan, so I thought Sydney might be at best sort of 8 to 10-ish, and that would have been a good result. I didn't see first of all, obviously the young blokes come in and make a big difference, but the game style, we've seen John Longmire sort of, he's not an unknown commodity. He's been there for this is his 10th year. We know how he plays, how his teams like to play. So for Sydney to make a fairly significant change to their game style was a surprise, and obviously it's paid off. They're 8-4. So yeah, Sydney would be my surprise of the year.
I think that the two links between Melbourne and Sydney for me, and compare them to two teams that were expected to be better and that aren't, in St Kilda and Carlton, is just the fact that Sydney, they're both team units, and they really function well as teams. With Melbourne, okay, obviously Clayton Oliver's an outstanding player, but Melbourne are getting so much out of their players around their on our list, that players like Neil Bullen, players like Pickett's come through, James Jordan, they're getting so much out of their list. Spargo, all these players that a lot of people wouldn't know much about, and Sydney are very similar. Who's been Sydney's best player this year? It seems to me that it's been a pretty even spread.
Yeah, absolutely. We saw people doing their mid-year All Australians, and most of them didn't have a Swans player because, like you say, no one had stood out. They've just had pretty even spread of good performances.
One thing I have to say about Melbourne before I give you my predictions going forward is that it's pretty scary that Sam Wiedemann is barely touching the ball at the moment, and if they can get one of Brown or Wiedemann going okay, because Wiedemann's kicked 3 goals in 4 games, and I'm pretty sure 2 of them came in the last minute of the game against Dogs when they'd already won. So if they can get that element of their team okay as well, then yeah, they're going to be extremely hard to beat. I'm probably still going to go with Geelong. I won't talk about it for too long, but I think that my surprise of the season has probably been Melbourne. I just never thought that Melbourne had it mentally in them, this list of players, to be able to do what they've been able to do now. They have been a list of players that, obviously they had that really strong season when they finished the prelim a couple of years ago, but then they nearly finished the bottom the next year, and Simon Goodman was close to being sacked, and Stephen May rocked up and he was supposedly not in good shape, and Jake Levy didn't have a good year. Tom McDonald nearly got traded. Petrarca started to come through last year, but Clayton Oliver, a year and a half ago, was a bit of a handball merchant. Wasn't a damaging player. Found a lot of the ball, but you wouldn't have considered tagging him at all. You'd probably just let him go and get his handballs and stuff. And they've just completely switched the team around. They play to their strengths with May and Lever. And it's funny, imagine if they had Tomlinson and Marty Hoare intercepting the end of the back line as well. That defensive unit would be, even stronger. And they're just playing to their strengths with their defensive unit and their ruckman, their gun midfield and stuff, and their forward line just works hard together as a team. Spargo had a massive impact on that game against Brisbane when they won. He's extremely unheralded player. Tom Sparrow as well, kicked a crucial goal. They just seem to be getting a lot out of their bottom 5, their bottom 6, and it'd be interesting to see, because they're still a young team and they're going to be inexperienced in big games. And I know they've won all their big games so far. The question is, can they win the big games when it gets to September?
Yeah, I think they'll certainly take some beating in any case. Yeah, that'll do us. I think you've probably got a pass mark there at least on your predictions. I think you can hang on to your crystal ball. We might revisit at the end of the year for a final mark. So thanks for that, Bruno.
So I'll get another go next year at doing it.
Yeah, at this rate.
Thanks, mate. Cheers, appreciate it.